Bonjour tout le monde. Aujourd'hui, on va faire le passé composé avec avoir. All right, so the passé composé is used to describe things in the past. In French, there's a couple different past tenses, and we'll learn all the different ways to use them in French too. But for now, let's just concern ourselves with the passé composé and only using the verb avoir. All right, so since I said that this is the past tense, we're going to talk about actions that happened previously So I have written two examples here. So we don't even know how to form the passé composé yet or anything. Let's just look at these two sentences and see some things that we can notice between the two of them because we have some commonalities here when we're using the past tense, okay? So both of these sentences we can see starts with j'ai. So I did say that this is going to use the verb avoir. So we have our conjugation with avoir that we start out with. Then we have to have what is called a past participle. Some of them are irregular, like faire, of course. Faire has to be irregular. It's got to be special. And then verbs like manger or regular ER verbs that are going to follow a certain pattern for creating the past participle. And the past participle in French is the equivalent of the ed ending in English. So when we say I walked, I ate, I swam, I drank, whatever it is that we say in English, in the past tense, that is the equivalent of the past participle. And then you have, of course, whatever the rest of the sentence is of the thing that you did. So, j'ai fait mes devoirs, I did my homework. J'ai mangé des hamburgers, I ate hamburgers. So these are both in the past tense. Okay, so in order to form the passé composé, you might have already seen, we need two things. We need our verb avoir, conjugated for whatever subject we have, and we need our past participle. All right, and so with ER verbs, as I said, they follow a pattern for the most part. Like manger, that is the infinitive. That's the unconjugated version. That is, nothing has been done to it yet. We take off the ER ending, much like we do when we conjugate the verb, and we add an E with an accent aigu. And for the vast majority of ER verbs, that is how you form the past participle. So travailler will become travailler with an E with an accent aigu. Now they are still pronounced the same. Manger, manger. Travailler, travailler. Okay? They are pronounced the same. So you're not going to hear it in speech when someone's using the past tense. That's why you have to look out for the conjugation of avoir, and then you will know that they are using the past tense when they are speaking. And this will be a skill that we'll practice and we'll learn through some listening activities to tell when somebody is using the present tense versus the past tense. All right, so the past participle for ER verbs formed by dropping the ER ending, adding an E with an accent aigu. Now, we also know IR verbs. IR verbs such as choisir, grossir, finir. All right, IR verbs also follow a pattern. Even the ones that we learned before that were irregular, like dormir, servir, those ones also follow this same pattern. So that makes it very easy. Again, cut off the IR ending like we do when we conjugate. And we just add an I. So choisir is going to become choisi. Grossir is going to become grossi. And finir is going to become fini. You guys may have heard me in class say, tu es fini, tu as fini, or vous êtes fini, vous avez fini, vous avez fini. And that is me using the past tense. Are you finished? Have you finished? All right. So for IR verbs, you take off the IR, add an I at the end, and it follows the same pattern for past participles. Now, of course, as with all things in French, we have to have our exceptions. All right. So there are quite a few exceptions, and some of them should not be very surprising. I showed you one earlier when I wrote those two examples on the board. Faire becomes fait. Boire becomes bu. Lire becomes lu. Avoir becomes eu. Être becomes été. And yes, that is the same word for summer, if you remember when we were doing our weather vocabulary. So don't get those two confused. If it's towards the end of the sentence, we're probably talking about summer. If it's towards the beginning of the sentence, close to our subject, je, tu, whatever it may be, it's probably the verb être. Voir, vu. There's a couple others. If you look on the PowerPoint that I'm going to post onto Teams, you will also see all of the irregular past participles, and they're also listed in our book. So we'll probably come across some of them while I'm doing some examples throughout this video. But for right now, these are especially the important ones that you should be familiar with. And you should know all of these verbs. You should have seen all of these verbs previously in different units and different lessons. But if you have to refresh what a certain verb means, of course, do so using word reference or something like that. Okay, so we have avoir plus our past participle. So real quick, I'm sure you guys know it super well, but let's do avoir. All right. J'ai, tu as, il a, nous avons, vous avez, and ils ont. Like most of the first verbs that we learned in French, être, faire, etc., avoir is incredibly irregular. So you do have to know all of the forms and have the forms memorized. So remember, avoir means to have. But when using the past tense, we don't translate the have part of avoir. Avoir is what we call an auxiliary verb. An auxiliary is something that is removed or away from the main verb. So we have avoir, which is our auxiliary verb. It's removed from the main verb. And then we have our past participle, of course, which is our main verb that is in the past participle form. And the thing that is important about the past participle is that regardless of what conjugation of avoir you have, the past participle will not change. We will see that in a couple minutes. Okay, so avoir is highly irregular, so make sure you know this and you have this down. This is very important. We probably will do just a quick little quiz on avoir just to make sure that everybody remembers the conjugations and has a good understanding of that. All right, so now for some examples. Let's start using the same past participle and we'll conjugate it out with a couple different subjects. All right, I have j'ai étudié, tu as étudié, il a étudié. All right, so we have our conjugation with avoir, we have our past participle. And you notice that our past participle does not change in these different ones. So we don't have to worry about any conjugations, any endings, anything like that. So this past tense, very simple. Your past participle remains the same. Conjugate avoir, you guys already know avoir, should know it very well. I've seen it many times throughout your French career, okay? And this is I studied, you studied, he studied. And if you conjugated out avoir the rest of the way and added the past participle, we studied, you all studied, they studied, okay? So we have studied here, like our ed ending that I said is the equivalent in English, studied, studied, studied. That remains the same. This is the only thing that changes, okay? And so we can say any verb that we've already learned, any verb that we've already learned, ER, IR, even the irregulars, you guys should be able to put in the past participle at this point. Either they follow a pattern, such as ER verbs and IR verbs. We already talked about the pattern. Either ER verbs, take off the ER, add the E accent aigu, or IR verbs, take off the IR, add the I at the end of it. So those ones follow a pattern. So most verbs, you can follow those patterns. And then we have the short list of irregulars that's in the PowerPoint and in your guys' book. All right. So when we're putting these sentences in the negative, this is where it becomes a little bit more complicated. All right, let's take the sentence. J'ai mangé. All right, so I ate. So we have our past participle, manger. It's an ER verb. We took off the ER ending, add the E with the accent aigu. We have our conjugation with avoir. Everything so far is going great. So when we put things in the negative, remember, we need our ne and we need our pas. But the question is, where is this ne and pas going to go? Because we have several verbs here, and does it go before one verb and after the other verb? Does it go in the middle somewhere? These are questions that I'm sure that you have. All right. So in this example here that I'm giving you, we turned I ate into I didn't eat. All right, and we have our ne and our pas that we had to add here. And just like every other conjugation that we've ever done before, present tense, future proche, our ne and our pas are going around our conjugated verb. Simple. Something we've already seen, we should be used to and accustomed to. So the first verb that you encounter that's conjugated, in this case, avoir, is going to go ne before avoir, pas after avoir. And then our past participle goes on the outside of it, okay? So again, think of this like a little sandwich. You got your two little pieces of bread and you got your meat there in the middle, the meat being the verb, of course, the conjugated verb, and then leave your past participle on the outside or whatever the rest of your sentence is for the passé composé. All right. If we wanted to do, this might be a sentence that you guys will use a lot. Il a fait les devoirs. He did his homework. So if we want to make this negative, we take our ne, goes before avoir, our pas goes after avoir. Il n'a pas fait les devoirs. And of course, remember, avoir starts with a vowel, so sometimes you're going to have this N apostrophe rather than the ne, because remember the ne is just before consonants. So any letter except a vowel. All right, so affirmative statement, we've got our subject, we have our conjugation of avoir, we have our past participle, that's not going to change no matter what our subject is, and then we have the rest of the sentence that follows. Then, when we put it in the negative, we have our subject, we have our ne, our verb, our pas, so we have our conjugated little sandwich here, then our past participle, and the rest of our sentence, okay? So, as always, if you guys have any questions or if this isn't clear, you need more explanation or more examples, please email me or please schedule a Zoom meeting with me. That's what I'm here for, to help you guys to understand. And let me know if you guys need anything or have any questions. Au revoir.